Hi, my name is Caspar Arbeeny. I'll be doing this month's video topic analysis for the champion briefs. This is for the 2016 November public forum debate topic. While there's been a bit of controversy and debate about whether or not this should be a topic at all, I don't think it's as bad as everyone is saying it is, and here I am doing an analysis on why I think it will be okay and some strategies to talk about for what we should do in terms of debating it. So without further ado, let's read the resolution out loud so we can discuss it further. The resolution is resolved. On balance, the benefits of the Internet of Things outweigh the harms of decreased personal privacy. It's an interesting topic. It does have a little bit of ground that we can talk about for either side, and it's a little bit of an interesting debate and a little bit different dynamics than we're used to than any other topic we've seen in public forum debate history. To start off, I think we should define the Internet of Things, because that's going to be basically the focus of the entire debate, and without defining that term, I think it would be very difficult to talk about. This is one of the few topics I would actually recommend some teams define a term at the top of case, as the Internet of Things is so broad and your case will be so dependent on making sure your arguments are topical that it might make sense at the top of your affirmative to have a definition, especially to clear it up for lay judges on exactly what we're debating about. The definition I have come across most commonly within the literature is the interconnectedness of devices to the Internet that formerly weren't connected before. So that includes devices like smart thermostats that you can control from your smartphone, self-driving cars, or maybe even like the quintessential, like ironic smart toaster that many people talk about and make fun of in articles and about the debate topic in general. In terms of that debate, so with that definition, it provides some unequivocal ground that both teams will agree on in reference to the entire topic. So like things like self-driving cars will pretty much be considered topical, or things like smart refrigerators or smart thermostats, or even like interconnectedness of medical devices will generally be considered things that are generalized and will be accepted topical under the topic. But the resolution does often have some wiggle room as when the Internet of Things actually started. And an example of something that might be considered not topical, though technically under the definition I just mentioned, is my smartphone. Phones were once not connected to the Internet. But now they almost always are. So depending on the time period and the year you define as like when the Internet of Things started becoming a term or started becoming the thing people are talking about, then that depends on the topicality. And I would agree that like framers' intent of the resolution would state that smartphones and laptops are both not topical references of devices, even though they would technically meet underneath my definition because they were once not connected to the Internet and now they are. Now, that means that both teams should probably have some sort of time period they think would be fair for debate to provide ground for both sides, so that's up to interpretation by each team and by which definitions they find. Thus, I think there are two recommendations when looking at definitions of this topic. So for one, you should have a time period that you think is fair for the definition I just mentioned. So in most cases of rounds, both teams can agree on it in first crossfire and come to a conclusion on what they think the Internet of Things is in order to make sure both sides have access to their ground. And thus, we agree with it throughout the debate. Second, you should have multiple definitions of the Internet of Things ready to, one, defend the topicality of your arguments, and two, to take out the topicality of your opponents. Because making sure you have different definitions is going to make sure certain teams won't get away with running really, really strange arguments that are very obviously not designed to be talked about on the resolution, but teams will try and misconstrue to be. Now we've got away the definition of the Internet of Things. Throughout this video, I will be referring to that definition. If you want more insight on the topic, go read the Champion Briefs framework sections and the topic analyses that all give some great analysis on what the topic is. Now I want to talk about the unique structure of this topic that makes it incredibly interesting and difficult to debate at the same time, as it is very different from every debate topic we've seen before. So the first thing you'll notice about this topic is this topic provides unfair, as in like it's unequal for both sides, impact mitigation. The negative is only allowed to impact to or link through privacy. If they do not have privacy somewhere in either their link chain or their terminal impact, their argument is non-topical and does not generate offense for their side. Thus, that can be exploited by pretty much every affirmative team to prove that they don't link through privacy, and thus they cannot access the topic. While the affirmative can impact to literally and link through anything they want. They can talk about economic growth, income inequality. They could somehow link the Internet of Things to genocide. It doesn't matter what they do because they can talk about literally anything they want while the negative is forced to talk about privacy. So that provides a huge amount of ground skew that I'll talk about overcoming later, but it should be referenced right at the beginning because that's what you're getting into the second you start debating this topic. You are starting from a downhill slope the second you decide to go negative within a round. Which is why I believe most teams will be flipping aff or flipping second, and thus the negative will almost always be going second in every debate, which provides some sort of mitigation towards the harms, but maybe doesn't fill the whole gap. The second thing I should mention is that turns on this topic have really interesting implications for the negative. On the negative, unless the negative specifically says the affirmative advantage doesn't actually impacts the privacy, and that's the terminal impact of their turn. Does not generate offense and only acts as a piece of terminal defense on the affirmative. Because if the affirmative for, say, some runs that the Internet of Things increases economic growth, then the negative says actually economic growth is bad for X, Y, and Z reason, unless the reason that's bad is because of privacy concerns, that only serves to prove that there's not benefits to the Internet of Things, not that the harms of the decreased privacy of the Internet of Things outweigh the benefits. So it doesn't fulfill your burden of the resolution to just win off of turns, which means that as a negative team, you can't go into the round expecting to kick your case and go for turns, which provides that you must spend a lot of time perfectly crafting your negative case, especially compared to other topics, even though you should be doing it on every topic, because you have to win off of it every single round, unless you somehow can turn every aff argument through a privacy link, which I highly doubt will happen to even the best prepped teams. But on the affirmative, turns function normally, though they might be up to some ground skew and theory arguments against them, in terms of saying that if they say that actually the Internet of Things increases personal privacy instead of decreasing it, the negative might go up and say, well, then we have no ground for debate because I literally can never access the resolution. And that might provide for some interesting debate despite having an actual legal turn underneath most definitions of debate and underneath most arguments we would run in a normal debate round. So those type of arguments need to be careful on the affirmative. And even if you do have a really good turn, like saying that actually, let's say the negative is running hacking and you say hacking is a good thing for X, Y, and Z reason, that may even be a little terminal defensy because you still don't prove that there's an actual benefit of the Internet of Things, or that that's an actual, or you don't actually negate the fact that there is a harm to personal privacy. A third thing I should mention, though I don't think should be referenced into the topic very often, is that technically, according to the grammar of the resolution, the negative doesn't need to link through privacy, doesn't need to link through the Internet of Things, because because the resolution has the benefits of the Internet of Things and the harms of decreased personal privacy as two completely separate clauses. Though I think this is incredibly and absolutely against the framers' intent, as the resolution should be about the Internet of Things entirely, I do think that some negative teams will come up and try and do this because they deem it to be the best worthy neg strategy in a sea full of really difficult to construct neg arguments. So I think every team should be prepared to debate both sides of it, just in case they come up against a team that's planning on running a framework such as that, and should be able to take it out or debate under it if they want to, in order to deal with it, because some teams will try and do it because they will deem it the best strategy to win rounds. Though I do believe that running it is a very high-risk scenario, as it will confuse a lot of judges, and it will confuse a lot of lay judges, and a lot of flow judges will be very inclined to believe that's not what the resolution is about. Why are we even talking about this if we are allowed to just talk about the harms of decreased privacy in dictatorial regimes such as Bashar al-Assad's regime? Why are we even discussing the topic? Why is the Internet of Things even a term in the topic? So it's an uphill battle if you put yourself on it, but it might be the only battle you can take if you deem that to be the best negative strategy. But both teams should be prepared to debate it. Now that we've talked about a few of the quirks of the topic that make it different from most public forum topics, I think we should talk about the actual strategies of argumentation. In this, I won't talk about very specific advantages and disadvantages in a lot of depth, because I believe that's the best done for reading through the champion brief and actually seeing the evidence and analysis they give on those arguments. I think that what I want to do is I want to talk about generalized strategies that you should take when constructing your affirmative case and constructing your affirmative rebuttals, and doing the same on the negative. To start on the affirmative, because it's the easier line to take, I think there are two really distinct lines that you can go for, both with their advantages and disadvantages, and I'll explain why. The first, I think, is running generalized advantages that are inherent to everything the Internet of Things does. So literally, just like they take the definition and only run off of things that are guaranteed to happen under that definition in the future because of the Internet of Things. So things like increasing growth through increased productivity, which is talked about in the brief, or many other advantages that are just general and apply to many different sects, regardless of what technologies actually get implemented through the Internet of Things, because the Internet of Things is guaranteed to have certain qualities. Those have the advantage of, one, not really being able to take it out on topicality, because there is no topicality link, because you are guaranteed to hit the Internet of Things. You don't have to defend that self-driving cars are a part of the Internet of Things. You just have to defend that the Internet of Things is the Internet of Things, which is a really easy debate to win, and one that you almost never fall into. The second advantage is that you're going to have a very large scope of your impacts. You're going to be affecting more people. Anyone who touches an Internet of Things device will see your advantage or disadvantage. And so when you have that sort of benefit for you, you can do a really easy weighing in the summary and final focus, as opposed to being like, we affect these 30,000 people by giving them each $1,000. You could say we affect the whole world by increasing economic growth by 3%. The other strategy, and that's the type of strategy I would take as a debater, and the one that I often took as a debater when I debated in high school. So those type of things are personally persuasive to me and maybe persuasive to other judges. The second thing you can do is find hyper-specific advantages, or even just specific advantages to specific applications of the Internet of Things. So an example of when I was doing my research is there's technically an article that talks about how the Internet of Things might even save bees from colony collapse disorder, which is a very specific application with a very high magnitude impact that you need to discuss in and of itself. There's also other connections, such as helping in very specific medical applications in order to increase knowledge between different groups, or in very specific, like self-driving cars is a very specific example of how it benefits. Those advantages will, one, need to be defended in the topicality debate. So if you feel comfortable in terms of defending certain articles and arguments on that grounds, then I would say go for it. But second, you're less likely to win out on scope, because those devices are less likely to be widely accepted throughout the entire world as just the generalized Internet of Things, which means your impacts are going to be significantly smaller than the normal graph. The best teams will probably find a strategy that A, combines both of these, so that they generate both the really large magnitude small scope impacts and the really large scope, probably relatively low magnitude impacts that are inherent to the Internet of Things. But the best teams will also find a problem that only can be solved by the Internet of Things, generating them entirely unique advantages and making sure the negative can't just say, we're solving that in the status quo with technology X or technology Y, which means you don't access your benefits. So those are the strategies I think are most persuasive for the affirmative, pretty much every team will take. There's advantages and disadvantages to taking both, to taking either, and I think combining a strategy of both between your summary, between your case and rebuttal will be the most beneficial and most consistent way to win lots of rounds. The neg, on the other hand, is significantly trickier, mainly because against the benefits of the affirmative, such as potentially stopping medical misdiagnoses or potentially saving all the bees, then it's going to you can't win on a strict utilitarian cost-benefit analysis. You're not going to be able to just outweigh, we save more lives through privacy, without going through a really jumpy link chain that will be unpersuasive to most judges, because it will simply sound like it's a bunch of logical leaves stringed together, as opposed to a coherent narrative that the affirmative is telling. Which is why I believe the neg is going to need to develop some sort of absolute weighing mechanism, whether it be focused on developing countries getting the short end of the stick in reference to the Internet of Things, whether it's talking about income inequality and how the informational inequalities given to governments and corporations by the Internet of Things will exacerbate growing income inequality within the United States and throughout the world. Or you will need to talk about the literal deontological harms of decreased personal privacy and why any harm to privacy should never outweigh any utilitarian benefit. And if you're not going to have some sort of absolute weighing mech, you're probably going to lose most of your rounds on the negative, simply because you won't be able to match the magnitude, scope, or realm of impact, or strength of link that the affirmative will gain. So you will need to establish some sort of weighing mechanism, which means your entire case should be focused around furthering that narrative and going really hard for it, so you can win the round on that alone and really develop it with really strong reasons of why you should prefer that calculus over why income inequality is an absolute harm that should be prioritized over all else, as opposed to simply just talking about generalized advantages and disadvantages that you will probably lose the debate on. The second is that the negative needs to link everything through privacy, which means one, you're very vulnerable to the affirmative attacking that link continuously, which means you need to be able to frontline it. And two, you can't, that means that also like running an impact turn to growth in case doesn't generate you offense. So you can't run in case that the Internet of Things will increase growth, which will then increase income inequality, because you're not linking through privacy, unless it's not a harm of decreased personal privacy, which is a reason why the Internet of Things isn't a benefit, which means you don't gain offense, which means you can't actually win the round off of that argument alone, which means your case needs to be very carefully constructed and very clearly linked through privacy, or else judges and opponents alike are likely to call you out on it. The third really difficult thing to do on the negative is it's close to impossible for the negative to respond to every possible hyper-specific affirmative advantage. Chances of the affirmative at least once throughout your time debating this topic, pulling out a really specific application of the Internet of Things that you have never heard out before is very high. And so what you're going to need to be able to do is you're going to need to have a set of responses or overviews that you are reading every round that will always be applicable no matter what the affirmative reads. So things like prerequisites, things that say like solving privacy and making sure we look at privacy first is a prerequisite towards the Internet of Things ever developing, because it provides some sort of harm to adoption. Or other prerequisites such as that, or other initial link turns on the actual idea that the Internet of Things has benefits. Because if you don't have those kind of answers, these random plans or random advocacies and applications will just run you over, because they will always be topical and you're going to have a very difficult debate on it. So you need to be prepared to have generalized responses that can apply to almost every single affirmative argument, or else you're going to be stuck in a really tough hole. So the negative is going to need to construct a really cohesive narrative that is not based on just a strict cost-benefit analysis, and is going to need to link through privacy, and is going to need to be prepared to answer tons of app plans that are likely going to beat them on scope, magnitude, strength of link, and every weighing analysis you are normally used to hearing within a round. Very difficult job, which is why I believe most teams will be flipping app and maybe flipping second if they feel really comfortable on their negatives. So with all those harms or all those disadvantages the negative listed, I think you should be constructing your case with all those in mind, and the champion briefs provides a really good source for getting a baseline of evidence and potentially analyzing the future trajectory of the topic through the arguments written in there, to provide you an initial ability to get some research done. Now I'd like to talk about the tournaments on the topic a little bit that are really beneficial, so that you know what you're getting into depending on which one you're going to. Besides the local semis bids that are around the country, such as Presentation out in California or Scarsdale up in New York, there are 3 big tournaments that I'd like to discuss really quickly. The first is Blue Key, which is an octafinals bid hosted at the University of Florida in Florida. And so that tournament tends to be mostly Florida teams with a few teams from outside, such as Poly went last year, or Ardrey-Kell tends to go, or Durham tends to go. But very few teams from out of state go, which means it tends to be a lot of local circuit teams that show up just because it's their biggest tournament they can go to within the state, which means you tend to have a lot of lay parent judges who aren't used to judging a lot, which means you should adapt your cases to be less swirly arguments, more direct arguments, and more simple arguments, as opposed to running possibly ground skew theory arguments on the affirmative case. So you should be tailoring yourself to that if you plan on going to the Blue Key Invitational. The next tournament I'd like to talk about is Apple Valley, which is a tournament out in Minnesota. It's a standard Midwest tournament. It's an octafinals bid and has a ton of really good teams show up consistently. Hawk and EL won it last year. And in general, that tournament tends to have a mix of flow and lay judges, and you should be prepared to basically debate like you would at any other normal tournament. The only caveat is that considering it's a Midwest tournament, the percentage of the pool that tends to expect the second rebuttal to respond to the first rebuttal is a lot higher. So if you plan on going to Apple Valley, you should be prepared to respond in that manner. So unless you're able to do that, it might be more creative to try and maybe flip first or flip for a side as opposed to flipping for second. The final tournament and the most important of the month is the Glenbrooks, which is held at the Glenbrooks High School in Chicago, or right outside of Chicago, I believe. It's an octafinals bid that breaks to a clean double octafinals, which means there are a significant amount of 4-2 screws every single year. So you're going to have to prepare to get really high speaks if you want to break, or go 5-1 to break. That tournament's incredibly difficult. It's often regarded as the biggest tournament of the first semester, or the most important tournament of the first semester. It's the last really big tournament that's actually on the September, October, November, or December topics, because Blake is on the January topic and also tends to be pretty large. So without those two, so that tournament tends to have a high concentration of really flow tech judges willing to buy anything. So you will tend to run into a ton of really squirrely arguments. Though don't tech your cases so much that the average person couldn't understand them, because there will also be lay judges in the pool that you should be able to tailor your cases to and analyze the arguments. But out rounds do tend to get pretty tech. If you want to see some, there are some videos from the Glenn Brooks Old online that will help you out for the future of your tournament discussions, as well as more discussions about the tournaments can be found in the champion briefs this month. Thank you for watching, and I hope you do well this month on this wonderful November 2016 PF topic.